What's going on, everyone? Like normal fashion, I didn't really give it a lot of time or notice for this space. So I don't necessarily know if this is going to be a big space, a small space, whatever. But it's been an interesting week. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, especially those that are trying to get into tech and whatnot. And it kind of made me start thinking about the premise or the idea of why people aren't getting jobs. And I always see these spaces like, let's get a job and this and that. But I don't really see a lot of people focusing on a lot of the overwhelming but very consistent reasons as to why people aren't landing those opportunities. And what's funny is it's almost as if it's a repetitive cycle. Like I have a lot of the same conversations. I think anybody that's going to help somebody land a job in tech, or if they're in the area of trying to help people land opportunities, you're going to end up having a lot of the same conversations. And in those same conversations over and over and over again, you kind of see a trend, or you see a repetitive cycle over and over again of what makes people not get things, what makes people actually get those opportunities. And so some of y'all know this, some of y'all may not know this. I started doing one-on-one calls, right? I don't necessarily know how long I'm going to do it, to be real, because if I'm even being honest with you, the time suck that it takes is wild. Like it takes a tremendous amount of time to do them. But I have really, really enjoyed the whole nature of being on a one-on-one call with somebody. And even in those one-on-one calls, right? I originally thought with the one-on-one calls that it would just be like a bunch of juniors coming at me. But I've had everybody all the way up to a CTO of a company come on those calls with me, and we've been discussing stuff, right? And I've definitely seen a lot of this trend being related to beginners, but I've seen so many people, even at the senior level, making a lot of the mistakes that I kind of feel like we will discuss. Now, the way I do my spaces, I try to leave the floor pretty much open for anybody. If you have a question, you have a comment, whatever it may be, more than happy to open the mic up and the floor up. If you feel nervous about asking a question on the mic, no problem. I got you. Check out the chat icon in the bottom right corner. I would love to give you more specific advice if it makes sense, or answer your questions as long as it's on topic and theme. Because sometimes we get stuff that's completely off topic and doesn't necessarily make sense. But if it is on theme and on topic, I have zero issues kind of addressing that. And so the theme today, obviously, is why you aren't getting a job in tech. So point blank, I think I'm going to just start kind of knocking out a bunch of the points that I kind of have in mind. And if it makes folks happy, sad, mad, I accept all the emotions and feelings. But I'm pretty confident that a lot of people are going to end up agreeing with a lot of this. And so, number one, the biggest reason that I see people not landing a job in tech, honestly, you don't even give yourself a fighting chance half the time. Like, it's wild. And I know to some people, they're like, oh, I'm doing everything that I can. A lot of people really confuse activity with achievement, and they confuse movement with achievement, to where they're like, I'm busy all the time. But they're literally in the exact same situation or in the exact same circle over and over and over again. They don't audit a lot of their actions. And I see it all of the time. One example I'll give you, I was on a call, this is not too long ago, and somebody was deciding to make their big projects, because I always say you got to have a big project. They were making their big project to be a clone of Discord, right? And I was like, cool. I'm really not a fan of clone projects. I've been very vocal about that many times in the past. I don't think they're good projects, especially if you're trying to get your first job in tech. I don't think it's a good project at all. But they were making a clone of Discord. And they were showing it off to me. We were on a call. They were showing it off, kind of walking me through everything that they built, everything that they were going through. And one thing that they showed me was, Danny, I spent 6 weeks on this, right? And I'm like, whoa, like 6 weeks is a lot of time to dedicate to something, right? And not the entire project. They spent 6 weeks on building out the functionality to add a role to a user, right? So you know how you go in Discords, you can add, create a role where it's you're a dev, or maybe you work with Angular, React, whatever. Maybe every Discord has their own roles, but essentially it's like adding that role to a user. And so that way, if they added that user in the chat, it would get pinged for that role, right? And I was like, wow, very impressive. I'm sure you learned a lot within that process. My question to you, because you stated that this is the project that you're trying to utilize to get hired with, how many hiring managers or recruiters do you know of that use Discord on such a level that using a role is one of the first things that they're going to look at as a feature to kind of check out? Almost nobody, right? Nobody ever really thinks about roles. Who thinks about roles? Owners of Discord channels. Outside of that, nobody's really thinking about the role thing. And so think about who your audience is that's going to be landing on this. Is it going to be somebody that's trying to create a Discord with 10,000 users? No. So when you're auditing your time and looking at some of the stuff that you're doing, does it make total sense to spend 6 weeks on a feature that 99% of people probably won't even ask you questions about or utilize? Or should we be focusing on bigger picture items that have a bigger impact instead of just adding a role icon that they probably don't even know the full extent of the strenuous use of it or the use cases of it or why it's even necessary or valuable? We need to think about that. And so when I'm talking about you're not even giving yourself a fighting chance, how many people literally come to me, and they're like, Danny, I can't get a job. Getting a job in tech is a scam. And I look at their resumes barely done. Their LinkedIn non-existent, right? They basically the only thing they did with their LinkedIn, they threw a profile photo up there, but you look at all the information, it's completely blank. You look at their projects are barely done. I saw someone the other day, they're like, I'm trying to get a job in tech. I've been trying for 3 years, but they haven't done any new projects within the last 2 years. So it's like, have you been doing it for 3 years? Or was it like you did it for a little while, then you stopped, and now you want to pick it back up again? You can't say that you've been actively searching for 3 years and you haven't done anything towards it, right? And it reminded me of a conversation that I had with somebody recently on a one-on-one where he was like, hey, I went through a boot camp, right? Went through a coding boot camp, spent $15,000. Life got in the way. He had to stop what he was doing. He didn't get a job in tech. He didn't get hired. He had to pay bills. He started working again. Now he's working in a warehouse, and he's trying to start back up again. And he's saying, hey, I'm going to go through another coding boot camp. I was like, number one, I don't think it makes total sense to spend another $15,000 to $30,000 on another boot camp. What is the second boot camp going to teach you the first one didn't? You already got the tools out of it. You didn't get hired out of it. We know what we need to do and what you're going to end up learning anyway. Why go through that process? It makes no sense to me. You're just putting yourself further in debt with the hopes that the boot camp is going to carry all the weight for you to get somewhere. Let's stop that. We went on that call from him going from wanting to create another $15,000 to $30,000 worth of debt. I think he said it was 20 grand. I can't really remember though. $15,000 to $30,000 worth of debt to now spending probably like $150 to get the same outcome, right? You need to give yourself a fighting chance. Like, you can't keep looking at things as if it's going to be the make all, be all, end all, and it's going to deliver you to where exactly you want to end up being, right? It's going to require some work. And I think for a lot of people, they kind of heard learning to code is easy. Oh, getting a job in tech is easy. La da 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 da. It's not. None of this is easy. And I think once they start realizing that positive moves can happen in the right direction, we just need the right mindset and expectation initially to kind of get us where we're going. And you need to give yourself enough ammunition and tools on your side to make this an effective move. When you're not doing that, as a hiring manager and as a recruiter, they have zero financial incentive to see something in you that you're not even presenting to them. They shouldn't look at you and be like, well, I know that they're going to be excellent in this role, even though they haven't done enough to kind of showcase that now. You need to be able to showcase that. A lot of y'all really aren't doing that. A lot of y'all are out here saying, hey, I barely got to do anything and someone's going to give me a job. Or I learned what an array was. Why aren't they knocking at my door right now? They should be fighting for me. A lot of y'all have really, I don't want to say terrible, but bad expectations of what this industry is and what the opportunities are. And my real hope is to kind of adjust some of that so we can kind of make it more attainable, but at least create a path for it. Hopefully that makes sense. If anybody has questions, anybody want to comment, they can come up, no problem there, or you can drop it in the chat like I said below. The other thing that I really want to address here is the types of projects some of y'all are coming with. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. There is a specific difference between projects that you build to learn from, and projects that you build to showcase for an interview, to a hiring manager, to a recruiter, to other developers, right? These projects aren't the same thing. And the problem with a lot of people here is they only want to build a project if it means it's going to get them a job. They only want to build something if it means they're getting hired. And the problem is you haven't built up a lot of skill set in certain areas yet. And so what ends up happening, and where a lot of confusion is because you haven't built up your skills, you feel completely inadequate. And because you feel inadequate, you don't want to take on the bigger project. And because you don't take on the bigger project, you find yourself in this endless circle over and over and over again, the cycle. Like, you know what you need to do. You know it's an A point. And to get to A point, you need to kind of go through a position that you don't want to go through. But you know A will deliver you to B, B will deliver you to C, and C is going to be where you really want to be. But you won't even go to A because you realize how many other steps are involved to get there. Because I'm looking at folks where it's like 9 months, and like the best project that they have to showcase is a weather application. I love a weather application. It's like one of the most common YouTube tutorials out there because you learn a lot about APIs, you learn about how to make API calls and get information back and display it. Fantastic project. But that's not the project that I'd want to go in front of an employer with. That's not the kind of project that I would want to kind of showcase saying, hey, this is why you should hire me, right? But it's a project that's absolutely necessary to learn the skills needed that I can use down the road in those bigger projects. But the problem is you're either wanting to do that project and get hired, or you want to skip that project completely and go to another one. It makes it a very difficult task and almost battle for you to kind of make something happen. And that's why I keep saying over and over, like, you're not even giving yourself a fighting chance. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I have these calls. The other reason why a lot of y'all aren't getting jobs, if I'm being completely real, I can't even begin to tell you over the last 3 weeks alone how many people I've talked to that have said, I'm trying to get a job. I've been trying for a long period of time. When I look at their portfolio or their LinkedIn, even when they describe themselves on their resumes, they don't even know what they want. How many people do I see listed as cybersecurity, software developer, graphic designer, UI, UX? Why do you need so many different titles? If a recruiter lands on that, the first thing that they're going to say is, oh, I don't know what they actually want on this. Are they going for a software developer role? Are they going for a UI UX role? I have no clue what they're going for. If I'm there, if I'm literally jumping on these calls and I'm there checking out your stuff because I want to help you, if I feel that way, can you imagine how somebody has no ties to you, no incentive to you at all feels? On average, the average hiring manager recruiter, they spend, not hiring manager, but recruiter or somebody in HR, I should clarify. They're the very first line of hiring for pretty much any organization out there. They spend on average 6 to 10 seconds on a resume or a LinkedIn profile before deciding if they're going to invest more time in it or not. If you can't be laser focused, specific, and straight to the point, you're literally costing yourself opportunities. You got to stop that. You got to stop that. You got to stop saying, oh, I have multiple hats. I could be multiple, I can showcase multiple skills. Whatever you do, especially when it comes to like your LinkedIn and your resume, you need to follow the 3 S's. I talk about this frequently. I'll say it again. You have to be short, sweet, and specific. You have to be specific and you have to be very direct to the point. So many of y'all bury the lead on a lot of stuff. And by burying that lead, you're basically hoping to, I guess to some degree, that you're building like a path or a roadmap that people are going to follow to find out, more about you. But the reality is, if they don't get that first impression right away that you're worth investing that extra time into, they're moving on to the next application. Think about this. One prime example. The other day I was talking to a recruiter in Dallas, and they were talking about how they made a full remote role, right? They posted it at 11 a.m. By 4:50, almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the end of day, they had over 9,000 applications. If they have 9,000 applicants, how do you feel that they're going to go through every single one spending 10, 15 minutes at a time? They're not. They're literally not. So if they're getting 9,000 applicants, you need to make sure to a certain degree that, number one, you're kind of putting yourself in a position that it's very easily readable. So many people come out with these like funky designs, which it's cool that you're showing your creativity or whatever. But if your design is so funky to the point where readability is affected, that's a problem. It's kind of the same way that I look at code, right? Whenever I'm coding something, my biggest focus is maintaining and increasing visibility and readability, right? I want it to be easy to read. I wanted to kind of go through and like anybody that comes after me when I write my code, they should be able to read this. They don't necessarily need extra documentation or comments. The code, it's very easy to read and follow. That's always a goal that I strive for. If I feel that an area is ambiguous, sure, I want to add some context. I want to add some comments. I want to add some documentation to support it, right? I want to add something there. But by itself, it should be easy for somebody to follow. If you're not making it easy for them to follow, how are they going to look at you in a way that says, you know what, this applies for you, this applies for us, I should go ahead and have a further conversation with you. The other thing is your resume and your LinkedIn specifically have to do two things. Number one, whenever I create mine, I'm doing one thing in particular. I'm thinking about the word positioning. How is it positioning me to talk about the things that I've done, the things that I've contributed to? That's why I always tell folks, don't just list the basic duties of your job. If you were a barista, I know you made coffee. If you're a cashier, I know you rang up the register. But what did you do specifically to be in that position for 3 years? It wasn't the fact that you just showed up to work on time. There was more to it. Talk about those contributions, because those contributions allow someone that, even though you're not in a technical role, to kind of grasp onto that experience and say, oh, they led an initiative here. They were able to they helped increase point of sale purchases at the register, and they were able to take customer complaints and translate it into business requirements. Those are things that you can kind of list out. Obviously, I'm just saying something generic here, but whatever you did, talk about those specific things, right? You showed someone somewhere something. You got a raise, you got a promotion, you got a higher paycheck. What did you do to get that? When you share that, it makes a lot of things really stand out, but it positions you to talk about those contributions. Because one thing that I think people forget, number one, I know that you're awesome. You know that you're awesome, but you now have this task to spend 45 minutes in an interview or an hour, whatever it may be. And now you have this audacious task to basically tell the person on the other side of the desk and condense your entire life into that time frame to where they're like, you know what? I want to go ahead and hire you or talk more or find out more about you. They don't hire a private investigator the day that you apply for a role, right? They don't. They have your resume and LinkedIn to go off of. They develop those questions off of that LinkedIn and resume. When you're not talking about that stuff, it's really, really hard for them to say, hey, I want to find out more, or it makes it really hard for them not to go down the path of developing generic questions. That's when you start getting the questions of, tell me a time that you argued with your manager, and tell me about a time where you were right and they were wrong. And those are questions nobody really wants to ask. Those are also questions nobody really wants to answer for the most part. But when you don't really give them anything to go off of, what do you expect them to ask? That's the one thing. Like, even when I made this tweet about the space today, what was the first thing that somebody said? Why don't I got a job in tech? Because they asked me questions that I don't know the answers to. Did you do enough to give them enough information to not ask those questions? Because oftentimes you haven't. Or when I jumped on a one-on-one call with somebody the other day, they were in the field of teaching. And they said they bombed 2 interviews, and 1 interview specifically because they asked questions that they weren't prepared for. And I was like, oh, wow, like, what are some of the questions that they asked? I was ready to write them down. And the first question they got stumped by was, why do you want to leave the field of teaching to become a software developer? I was like, you didn't think somebody would be curious as to why you're trying to make the career transition? You didn't think somebody would want to know, why do you want to make this big leap into a brand new field? A lot of people don't think about the questions that a hiring manager or a recruiter are going to even ask. And they're completely like, I'm just going to wing it. Winging it is cool when you're hanging out with buddies or you're hanging out with somebody for the very first time. That's cool. But when we're talking about possibly shifting your career or getting a higher position from junior to mid or mid to senior, you need to put a little bit of thought into, like, what are they going to be asking me? Is it going to be related to me switching careers? Or what is the most common question what is the most common question do you think that you would be asking the interview within the first 10 minutes? I'm not even going to say something for a second. I just want you to think about that for a second. What do you think is the most common question you would be asked at the very beginning of an interview? All right, it's great meeting you. Why don't you tell me about yourself? Every single interview I've ever been in my life, that's the layup initial question that gets asked. I can't even begin to tell you how many people don't have an answer for that, or like they wing it in the moment. Why haven't you thought about that? I'm not saying you necessarily need to have an answer memorized that you're going to regurgitate, but if you haven't even thought about it, because here's the reality. Even when I prepare for stuff, there are moments where I'm like, I wish I said that. But at least when I prepare, the likelihood of me forgetting very important points are very small. When I wing it, oftentimes, I'm always regretting after the fact how many things that I forgot to mention within that interview process. How many of y'all haven't even thought about that? Or how many of y'all haven't even thought about how you're going to try and bring up how you've utilized the technologies that are listed for the role, how you've utilized it in real scenarios? Or how many of y'all haven't even thought about how you're going to try and address or at least broach the topic of the project that you built so that way you can take a portion of that interview to talk about your technical abilities and how it relates to the company that you're going for? How many of y'all have barely read the job description to see some of the concerns that they have in the job description so that way they want to kind of list that out and answer that and address that? Like I see all the time where a job description may mention testing, and developers like, oh, I didn't mention anything about testing, or I never even wrote in the resume that I have experience with Jest and React testing library. Well, if you're going for a developer role that, let's say they're using a Java React stack and they're asking for someone to have specific like front end level testing, and you haven't even mentioned that, how does that work in the hiring process? How does that benefit you? Have you thought about that? A lot of people don't. Or prime example, in the this was several months ago. Actually, this is a year ago now. Someone in my Discord was talking about, and for those that don't know, shout out to the Commit Your Code Discord. Link is in my bio. We have like almost 13,000 developers from all over the world. Really great community, really active community, really amazing people in there. And in the Commit Your Code Discord, we had someone complaining about how they applied to 2,000 roles. 2,000, right? That's a lot of roles. In about a 6-week period. And they only received 2 callbacks. And they're like, it's hard. It's difficult. I'm going through this and I'm just going and going and going, and I'm not getting any results. And I was like, 1 callback per 1,000 is a very difficult metric to, number one, go through, realize, and experience. But number 2, to me, it's a very big tell that something is going horribly wrong. There's a huge disconnect. This is horribly, horribly wrong. If you're applying to that many roles and not getting a call back, it's a bad situation. It means a couple things to me. Number one, you haven't addressed pretty much anything in the job description, if that's the case. Number 2, it means you have a very generic resume that you're basically spraying and praying, right? You're just spraying it out. You're mass hitting the LinkedIn easy apply and all that good stuff, and you're just praying that it lands and hits. The problem with that is there's an ATS software, right? It's called an applicant tracking software. Pretty much every company utilizes some form of this. And what it does is it's searching resumes for a certain amount of keywords, and pretty much it uses that job description as that layer to kind of say, okay, compare that resume to this and tell me how it ranks. Based on that, the ATS software will rank your resumes, right? And so if you have 1,000 applicants, I know that the people that match that job description actually craft their resume to that job description, they're going to rank significantly higher on that list than people that do not. And I know just from knowing how human beings work that at 9 o'clock in the morning, after someone drinks some coffee, they're going to have a lot more enthusiasm with applications 1, 2, 10, and 20 than they will at applications 990, 995, right? It's just human nature. I want to stack the deck in my favor a little bit, and I want to end up as close to the top of that stack as humanly possible. I don't want to go further down where patience, empathy, compassion, and all that stuff starts to dwindle because you're reading applicant after applicant and you're seeing so many bad resumes make it in that it's a big disconnect from what you're looking for. So if I know that, right, and I'm trying to stack this up in my favor, I want to go ahead and craft my resume. Now, the most common objection I hear to this is, do you know how long it takes to craft a resume every single time for a job maybe even a job that doesn't call you back. I totally get it. Do you know how much time it takes to apply to 2,000 roles and only get 2 callbacks? It also takes a lot of time. So it's up to you which area you're going to spend the most amount of time in. Because I can almost guarantee that crafting that resume is going to lead to a lot more time spent per role, but it's also going to lead to a lot more callbacks coming in, as opposed to applying to 2,000 places and not having any positive feedback. The other thing that I can say is I still do this. I have 6 to 7 versions of my resume. Based on different job descriptions, I can adjust it quickly and spend a little bit less time for each role as opposed to somebody else. And I think that's really, really important to think about and kind of put into perspective. So think about that. Because you know what's funny about this person in particular? After a 10-minute call of pointing these things out, literally 10-minute call, that's all I spent on that. 3 weeks later, they had their first job in tech. 3 weeks later. The person had the technical skill. They passed the coding interviews. They couldn't get a call back. Why? They were sabotaging their own path into success. Like, I see it over and over and over again. And a lot of people are just so, they look at things almost as if it's like a checklist, right? Oh, I need a resume. Let me knock this out as quickly as humanly possible. Oh, I need a LinkedIn. Let me barely put any effort into this, knock it out as humanly possible. Oh, I need a project to showcase to employers to show that I actually have technical ability. Cool. Let me just check this off as quickly as possible. Where are the jobs at? Y'all, you ain't even giving yourself a fighting chance. Notice how that was the first point and it's still making it circle around. How many times do we see people literally sabotage their own way into the path by doing the bare minimum? Now, I'm not one to say like you need to go above and beyond and you need to build the next, startup and you need to build this. I'm not saying all that, but I am saying we need to get out of the mindset of, because what was the question that I got asked last night? Danny, what's the least that I need to know in order to get a job in tech? Why are we starting this off with the perception of the least you need to know? Why is it the least? Why isn't it what can I develop my skill sets in? Or how far can I go down with this? Why isn't that the thought process? Why is it what's the bare minimum I can know to finally get an opportunity, a job, and start changing things? I get it. I learned how to code. I wanted to change my circumstances too, right? For those that don't know, maybe you don't know who I am. I spent literally 11 years of my life frying chicken in the gas station. I desperately wanted to change my circumstances. But the thing is, if that's your mindset going into it, how do you deal with when the moments become difficult? Because they will. It's not an if, it's a guarantee. Here's a spoiler alert. If you're new to this process, you're absolutely going to get smacked over the head with some code. You're absolutely going to have a moment where you're going to want to flip a table. You're absolutely going to have a moment where you're questioning yourself, why are you doing this? Why are you going through this path? Watching TV is pretty comfortable right now. I don't want to touch this thing. I don't want to see a VS Code editor. I guarantee that moment's going to come. And I guarantee, this is the second spoiler, you're going to fail at least 500 times. Surprise! Sorry to spoil that one for you. Now that you know you're going to fail 500 times, go out and fail and stop being nervous about it. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. But being so afraid of it to where you're like, I'm not even going to start this task because I know it's going to be rough, you're holding yourself back in a lot of situations, and you don't necessarily need to be doing that. So for a lot of people, why they aren't getting a job in tech, that's a big reason right there. The other reason why a lot of people aren't getting jobs in tech, honestly, you're literally willing to make life-altering decisions based on the popularity of a tweet. You're literally willing to make life-altering decisions from someone that doesn't know you, doesn't possibly even care about you or know that you exist. They don't know your market. They don't have a clue of what you need to do in order to get these roles, but they're willing to exchange those words and false promises in exchange for a red heart. And to them, that's an equal exchange. And you don't even audit your influences. I tweeted about this, I believe it was yesterday, where the sheer amount of career coaches on this platform and other platforms that end up in my DMs needing help would literally blow your mind. Maybe it won't blow your mind too, though, but it would blow your mind. It's absolutely astonishing. I've literally seen verbatim where somebody was building their following and they told me their life story, like, oh, I'm a kid in high school, you know, I just started learning code on the side. I really love it. I'm loving everything I do. Next thing you know, they're giving folks little career advice on how to pass technical interviews. You ain't even passed an interview. You haven't even gone through an interview. You're giving someone advice that could potentially like shift their career, hurt their career, hurt them monetarily, but you don't care because you're getting the followers and the vanity metrics. You don't audit. And the problem with a lot of people, they don't even audit it. They see, oh, this tweet got 500 likes, has to be the truth. Oh, this tweet got 2,000 likes, and it says these are the 7 GitHub repos that you need to know if you want to be a developer. You know how many times I've seen tweets like that? I look through it, I'm like, damn, I don't know any of these. I hope my boss doesn't see this tweet today. It's like, pop quiz, Danny. We're going to find out if you're a real developer or not. If you can't tell me the 7 GitHub repos that a developer needs to know, you're fired. Thankfully, that hasn't happened. It may come as a shock to a lot of folks, especially if you're not in tech. A lot of developers don't spend their entire day on GitHub searching through multiple repos to kind of find out what's valuable, what's not. Oftentimes, you may find out about a repo through like common conversation, through community, stuff like that. You may see something really interesting go viral, something like that. But a lot of developers aren't going throughout their entire day just searching every single individual repo on that platform to find out what's good, what's bad, what's ugly, what's fantastic. That's not what most people do. They may do it for like open source projects that they're interested in, but there's an interest there initially, right? It's coming out in the beginning that they've already found out about it. They're not like blindly just searching everything on the platform. So just being real about that. Anytime you see that some of those resources, you really ask yourself, are people actually utilizing this? And the problem is with lists, and it's not even a tech Twitter thing. Like lists have been forever. How many magazines, like, because I was thinking about this the other day where people were complaining about like the list situation on Twitter. I was like, do you know when I was a kid, I'd stand in the supermarket and you see like some of those like trash magazines at like the front cash register. How many of them said the 5 things you need to know to have a successful career, the 5 things you need to know to keep a man, the 5 things you need to know to keep your wife happy? Like we see that stuff all the time. People naturally gravitate towards lists. I'm not upset about that. But what I am upset about is a lot of the resources that some of these people throw on these lists, they don't even audit themselves. They do a Google search, they throw a bunch of links in there, and they send it out there. I would be much happier if it was a list that people actually curated and went through, and they weren't just like trying to shovel out content on a regular basis of these lists. Because I'll tell you this much, I make a list every once in a while, but those lists are like actual tools that I utilize or actual things that I'm going through. Or, for example, the common question, like, where can I learn to code besides like free code camp? I'll come up with a whole list of that just so you have actual resources that are vetted and valuable. And what's funny is, even in my last list that I shared, I think it was like 10 places you can learn to code for free without like spending money on a mentor or boot camp or whatever. Literally 9 of those places, people said I'd never heard of before, but when they looked at the reviews, they're like, this is actual boot camp curriculum. It's like, yeah, that's the point. I'm not just there saying, go to this website, go to that website, go to this YouTube. No, what's the point of that? You got to audit your following. You got to audit your influences. And even my stuff. I'm not saying I'm excluded from this. You need to be auditing my stuff too. If I make a tweet, I'm not just saying you need to be like, Danny said this, so I'm going to follow it. No. Let it spark an idea in you and do some research on it. See if it applies to you. We try very, very hard. At least I do. I try very, very hard to not give out bad advice. But I know for a fact there's been times where I've missed the mark. So if I'm missing the mark and I know that, I know damn well a lot of these other folks are missing the mark. So if they're missing the mark and you're not thinking about that, you're taking advice blindly and you're applying it. Like, prime example too, I'll even say on this. And I'm not saying the stack is bad. But what's the most common stack that I see people struggling to get a job with? The MERN stack. Now, I'm not saying MERN stack is bad because it's not. But what I am saying is, how often have you actually taken the time to say, you know what? I'm in this market. The YouTube tutorials that I'm following or the bootcamp that I'm following, whatever it may be, they're in a different market. Or the bootcamp I'm at, they don't necessarily have a great graduation rate, but they're teaching the MERN stack. Maybe I need to do a little bit of research into my local market to see what applies here. Because even on those one-on-one calls, a lot of the common denominator for people not getting jobs is the MERN stack. And they're in markets that just don't have the MERN stack, right? There are markets where MERN stack is thriving and great and good. That's fantastic. But what if you're in a market that isn't? Are you just expecting that, hey, I'm going to learn the MERN stack and I'm going to stay here? And if a company's using Java, they just need to get on to the program and be like, you know what, you know the MERN stack. We'll go ahead and hire you and train you on this. No, they're not going to do that. Especially when we're talking about like a junior dev, you need to think about something. One of the biggest concerns that a company has when they onboard a junior dev is how long is this actually going to take to onboard you, upskill you, and kind of bring you to a better level, right? The onboarding process is a very, very like big factor in who they're hiring, especially for your first job in tech, right? And so if we're looking at the onboarding process, they're basically saying, I know if I hire this person for 6 months, they really won't be able to make true valuable contributions to this code base. But if we put them on the right team, give them the right standards, give them the right metrics and the way that we do things, and introduce them to our code base, I know after 6 months, they're going to really make some valuable contributions. And by the end of the year, it will completely be paid off to where the 6 months that we lost onboarding them are no longer a concern of ours, right? That's a big thing right there. So that basically means for 6 months, they're losing money. Why are they going to want to lose money on somebody that they don't necessarily feel can be onboarded within that time frame? I mean, for a lot of people, you say you've been learning code for like 2 years, right? And for 2 years, the application that you're showing to an employer is a weather app. That's a tough sell. You need to be thinking about yourself, and I've used this example before, I'll say it again just in case people are here for the first time. You literally need to think about yourself as an investment. You're literally an investment. Companies are not in the game of making very risky bets. If you notice, a lot of companies make very well thought out bets that end up paying off in the end. Your objective is to de-risk yourself as much as humanly possible. And what are some of the ways that you're going to do that? Number one, knowing the tech stack that they're using and that's in demand in your market. If your entire market is enterprise level companies and they're using Java, C#, etc., and you're walking in with MERN, you're not going to do too well in that conversation. If your market is all about enterprise level companies and everything that you're doing is not really having any kind of business focus at all, how do you think that conversation is going to go? Not favorably. If you're talking to an enterprise Fortune 500 level company and the project that you come out with is, hey, I made a Twitter clone, it's probably not going to be a great conversation for you. But now if you can at least come out with some kind of project that's like, hey, you know what? I've got a project that's using a tech stack that you're utilizing, or maybe it's not using all the technologies, but it's using some of the core ones, right? It's solving a problem because I'm a problem solver. It's delivering a solution because that's what I do. And here's the reason why I believe that solution is to be accurate, because I think about these things. I'm demonstrating so many qualities by doing that and following that approach. How many of y'all don't even do that? How many of y'all, and that's the one mindset shift that I'm really trying to push hard lately. I'm trying to really emphasize and push that you're not just there to regurgitate and memorize lines of syntax. You're there to understand that the syntax is the delivery mechanism that you're utilizing to deliver that solution. Your solutions affect the bottom line of the business. Your solution affects the profitability of a company sometimes. You need to be thinking about that. A lot of people don't. And that's a massive reason why a lot of people aren't even getting a job in tech because of that. And this is like over the last several weeks, I've seen this over and over and over again. Or another thing, and it's a big reason why I even cap the time limit on my spaces. You don't ever see me doing 10-hour spaces. Why do I do an hour, hour and a half? Specifically because I don't need you becoming a professional Twitter Space listener on my watch. I would rather you take the information that you deem necessary and go implement the damn thing. Otherwise, in 6 months from now, you're going to be listening to the same space with the same questions and the same circumstances. How many of y'all started 2023 with the hopes and dreams and aspirations of, I'm going to change my circumstances, but when you look at your project, you look at your coding status, you look at your skill set, and it's in the exact same position as it was December 2022? We got 4 months, less than 4 months, 3 months damn near. No, it's 4 months until 2024. I want a lot of y'all to really start making the moves now to make 2024 the year where things start going in our direction. Now, one thing I do want to hit on and I don't want this being a crutch because some people are using it for that, but there absolutely are less jobs now than there were in 2021. A lot of beginners freak out when they hear that. It's not a freak out situation if I'm being real. Like, it does suck that people were laid off and they haven't been able to get a job. Some people still haven't been able to get a job. I've even talked to team leads where, like, prime example was I was talking to one team lead in New York where he can't get a job, right? But when we started talking things, he's like, yeah, I can't pass a coding interview. And so now we kind of came up with a whole game plan for him to start passing that. He sent me a message literally on Tuesday, I believe it was. I spoke to him 3 weeks ago. He's like, I feel more confident now than I felt a month ago, which I don't think he would have felt if he didn't have a game plan to follow, right? Because he's been unemployed since what, March? And it took until us talking at the beginning of August for him to finally feel confident and feel like he can do something. It doesn't matter what level you're at within your journey. You could be an absolute beginner. You could be a team lead of a team and still feel like overwhelmed and stuff. There are definitely less jobs though. 2021 was like it was a global pandemic. The entire world decided to go remote. Everything that we knew and loved turned into a virtual setting, right? That shift has kind of gone backwards now. I even said this during the pandemic. I got a lot of hate for it, but guess what? Now everyone kind of sees that it's true. And that's the thing with social media. Sometimes when some people get angry about stuff, you just kind of need to let it get played out a little bit. And I said literally at 2021, this entire remote world setting is not here to stay. It's impossible. Think about the corporate real estate market. It would flatline if that happened, right? It would literally die. Everyone will go back to offices. People were mad about that, but what did we see? Do we see as many remote roles available as it was during 2021, 2022? Absolutely not. Not even close. Now, I'm talking about a minute fraction of what it was before. When there is a remote role, what ends up happening? Prime example, person posted a job, within 6 hours had 9,000 applications. Why? When you go remote, you compete with the entire global population and entire talent market around. That's a tall, tough ask for a lot of people to go through. But what are a lot of companies embracing? The whole hybrid schedule. Where, hey, you don't need to be in the office 5 days a week. You could be there 3 and take 2 days to kind of, stay at home, work from home, whatever it may be. But 3 days, you got to be in the office. I personally think a lot of companies will still keep that. But do not be shocked if you start seeing a lot more companies go back to 5 days. I won't be shocked. For me, I see this as an easing process into getting people back into the routine of being in the office. I do think, though, that some companies will keep it because it's seen as like a perk, kind of like a perk of, certain things like we have ping pong tables and stuff like that. But I absolutely do see companies going back. And I've already seen companies going back to 5 days a week. I've already seen it. It's going to happen. So for those that are always like, oh, I'm just going to get a remote job and this and that. We've already established early in this call that hiring a junior developer, a company will lose money in the beginning, but they do it with the payoff at the end. They do it with the payoff of keeping a long-term employee, this and that, la da da da. The most common thing that I get asked, and I know I'm not the only one that gets asked this. I know pretty much anybody that's trying to help people, especially beginners, gets asked this. Well, I'm in a different country. Can I just get a job in America, remote, la da da? You can absolutely get remote jobs. I'm not gonna say it's impossible. I always leave, percentages open for opportunity. But the reality is, for your very, very first job in tech, it is extremely, extremely difficult to make that happen. There is no financial incentive to an organization or a company to hire someone in another country, go through all the legal loopholes that they need to go through to hire, pay taxes for multiple countries, the red tape. Like, there's a lot legally that has to happen for that to transpire and come to existence, right? Especially when we're talking about an absolute beginner that is going to need a lot of training, hand-holding, watching. It's very, very, very difficult for that to happen. It's easier if you're in the country, but it's very, very difficult to make that happen when you're in a completely different country, time zone, continent. It's a very tall ask. And so the reality is, and I could tell you what you want to hear, but the reality is it's probably not going to be the thing that ends up happening first. And so that incentive becomes a lot more appealing when we're talking about developers with experience. Because now, if a company's like, oh, this person in another country has 4 years, 5 years experience, they can add to a code base, they can add valuable contributions, they can get onboarded in almost no time at all and start making value. That's appealing to a company, and they can hire them for a fraction of the cost. That's very appealing. But hiring the absolute beginner that needs a lot of training, that's not appealing right away. And so that's just me being real. I won't say it's impossible though, because I don't believe anything's impossible. But what I will say is you definitely have to be a lot better than a lot of the competition at that point for that to even transpire. And if you're coming in with some absolute basics, that conversation is not going to go in the direction that you wanted to go, unfortunately. And so for me, my biggest goal is I'm very big on being very transparent. I'm very big on being very, I want to say blunt, not blunt to be rude, but blunt to be very specific on things that need to occur and happen for something to go your way. And so now that we know that, let's develop the things that we need and put our focus into the areas where we need to put it so that way we can make some things happen. Right? Because think about it. If you're in a country, I'll use Nigeria as an example because I get, messages from Nigeria all the time. If you're in Nigeria and now that you know, hey, it's going to be very difficult for your very first job in tech to be in the West, right? But it probably isn't going to have the same difficulty when you have multiple years of experience. That's a different conversation. So let's start putting our effort where it needs to be. But the other thing too is a lot of people only look at like America, London, Canada, UK as places to get jobs. There's a whole world out there. There's almost 200 countries out there. We need to be looking at all the areas of opportunity as opposed to just select opportunities in 4 or 5. And I know it's a very appealing because you see the numbers on social media, like some of the salary ranges and stuff. I totally get it. But the reality too is, hey, give yourself a fighting chance to start building that experience, then start focusing on other areas as well. And because the other thing too is there's a lot that you learn by working in organization in a company. And a lot of that isn't going to come from just, sitting down idly the entire time, hoping and praying that something goes right. I don't want to hope and pray that something goes right. I want it to actually transpire and be something that makes sense. So I see a lot of people requesting. I actually had my phone closed, so I wasn't paying attention. I apologize. I'm going to start bringing some people up. I do always make this warning whenever I start opening the floor up. It's not me trying to be combative, but I am mindful of the audience and people that we have here. And so the thing that I'll say is if something errs on the area of bad advice, I'm pretty sure you're not going to say it maliciously. But I do like to follow it up just in case someone doesn't necessarily have information or knowledge as of yet to say, this is bad advice, this is good advice. It's not me trying to be rude. I'm not trying to be combative, none of that. So I just want to give that warning and, preemptively there. But yeah, I'm very, very mindful of that. So hold on, let me accept. There's somebody else, but they just dropped down. So I'm bringing them up. Like I always say, pretty much anybody can ask questions or come up on these spaces. I try to just do it for the community. So if you want to come up, speak, ask a question, whatever it may be, you can absolutely do that. I do want to stay on topic. I know some people, when they get the mic, like they jump completely off topic. I want it to remain on topic. So if you have some question about, what I think about Next.js, that's not going to be the conversation for this kind of space. It's going to be something completely different. So, but yeah. I will go to Jason. Jason, what's up?
Hey, man, happy Saturday. So global warming, out of the question. We're not talking about that
We're
right now.
not talking about it, no.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm glad you brought up the resume stuff because I wanted to ask you about that. I recently learned about the ATS thing. And Janai had suggested that running your resume through like a just straight text editor spits out or outputs to your screen like what they would see when they run that. Is that accurate? Would that be a good suggestion? Because I did it and you see a lot of like the things that could error out, which could cause problems if they're looking at it. So I guess I just wanted some clarification on that because I did see it in real time, but I didn't know if that was something that could benefit other people too.
Honestly, like I tell people all the time, this is a very specific reason why I'm not into designed resumes. I'm very against 2-column resumes for that similar situation. There are like some standard ATSs, but some companies even make their own, right? So when they're making their own or they're going through like custom solutions, you have no clue how it's parsing or showcasing your resume. I want to avoid those situations as much as possible. So even my main resume now, which by the way, it was slightly different when I got my first job in tech, but my main resume now, it's completely black and white with simple text. There's no fancy design there because at the end of the day, too, even like most recruiters will tell you, that design doesn't really do much. I've never seen that design tell a recruiter like, you know what, I gotta get on a call with this person. I've never seen that happen or heard of that happen. They may acknowledge the design. They may see, oh, I like the fact that they use blue, whatever, but that's not a deciding factor for folks. The deciding factor is going to be the information on that resume. So why am I even killing available real estate on that resume where it could have value for a design or for something that's insignificant on the grand scheme of things? I'd rather have points or volunteer experience or leadership qualities or tech tools that I'm utilizing. I'd rather have that than anything else. So for me, I don't think it does anyone any justice to have a overly designed resume. But I've never heard of like throwing it in a text editor. If it worked and showcased it, why not? Because that's like a way to kind of see that. I don't think I've ever tried to like see how it's translated over, but I will use like certain tools like I forget the name, but there's resume scanning apps out there that will basically tell you to at least some degree like where your resume ranks on ATS. I don't necessarily know how much stock I put in that regardless, but it's a good gauge. And so if you get consistent results with one, maybe that's an idea of, hey, maybe this is good, maybe this is bad, maybe I need to make an adjustment. It's impossible to make like 100% resume that's gonna like appease every tool out there. But also, when you're customizing your resume to the job description, it's gonna match higher anyway, naturally because of the points that are gonna hit. So I would say that. But me personally, you know, I've had arguments about this on Twitter too, if I'm being real. But I talk to recruiters and hiring managers literally on the regular. Now, I did say this in a previous space, and a recruiter thought it was absolutely genius. I'm big on like if you want have multiple resumes, right? And if you've once you get through the interview number one, which is basically like a behavioral and screening interview, once you get through that one, you could literally be like, "Hey, I have a nicer resume that I'd love for you to pass on to the hiring manager. Could you do that?" Because they're going to be the ones that are going to determine whether you get the job or not. So for me, I'd rather pass the ATS with something boring and then hand them over the fancy resume after the fact, so that way they can see something nice. That would be my strategy if I was just so adamant of doing something fancy. But I personally, I mean, the resume that got me every job from Fang to Fortune 500. It's just been a black and white one, very simple and to the point. Caleb, go ahead.
I have a different topic, if that's cool.
Yeah, go for it.
That's cool. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to add on one thing you mentioned, Danny, about just like the expectations of how fast you can get a job in tech for like even someone that's never been in tech before, but also just even like changing jobs in tech is difficult. And so like even for someone at different times of my career with different levels of experiences, there's still a lot of work and a lot of prep in between those jobs and those job searches. And so I definitely agree with you, Danny, on you want to give yourself the best fighting chance that you can. You want to study the right things and be prepped for those calls. And for me, being able to take the time and come up with a game plan and then, study and practice a little bit every day as I'm prepping for the final interviews or the like when I actually get an interview has really made a big difference. And I would say in the past before I did prepping as much, it was a lot more difficult because I think as someone who's also been on the interviewer side, you can tell when someone hasn't prepped that well. And for me personally, I feel like the interview sometimes can get out of it has to be a little bit more guided, and the interviewer has to be a little bit more rigid in how the conversation goes. But when someone's prepped and they're ready to answer questions, you can get through a lot more in the interview to get to know each other a little bit better too. And to me, that's part of the interview process is being able to have time to connect with each other so a company can know who they're hiring, like you mentioned, and you can demonstrate to them why you know it. And I think that's another avenue that prep gets you, is you have a little bit more time in interviews because your answers are more succinct, they get to the point, and you're demonstrating your best self to that company.
Absolutely. And you know what's funny is I was even mentioning this the other day. So recently, there was somebody, I won't say their name, but there's somebody that I definitely appreciate. I look up to them somewhat. They're a GDE. I think they're a 5-time GDE, a 3-time Microsoft MVP. Like they have like major accolades, right? And even with them, it took them several months to land another opportunity. This is someone that's established in the industry, worked at some of the largest organizations around, still took them several months to get a job. So when it takes them several months, you think it's going to take you 90 days? Like, and you're coming from nothing with nothing? Like some folks just come with the bare minimum, and they're like, and then we look at people that have the maximum, right? And I saw a stat. I don't necessarily know how true the stat is, but I thought it was at least interesting to think about. I probably wouldn't ever like use this in like a big speech or something. But there was a stat that said based off of every $10,000 in your salary that you're expecting to get, you could theoretically expect to be unemployed for 3 weeks at a time. So up to 3 weeks at a time per 10 grand. So if you're thinking about for, 100 grand, how many weeks does that even equate to? We're talking about literally 30 weeks of unemployment time. And that's with you already having the skills for the role. So imagine when you don't have the skills and you're still trying to build up. And that's the problem. A lot of folks really put themselves at a disservice. And I'm actually making a video, like a short video on this, but I'll say it here. The other day, I put out like my annual kind of poll that I always put out. And I asked people in the poll, how long, and I asked it only for people that work in tech, how long did it actually take you to land your very first job in tech, right? I put it out on LinkedIn and I put it out on Twitter. This year's poll had 2,300 people vote on the poll. I think that's a very good number to kind of get like a good estimate and gauge on these. And so the options that I put out were 3 months, 4 to 12 months, a year to 4 years, and then 4+ years, right? The comments were what I found almost the most amusing part of the whole thing, because so many beginners were in the comments saying, seeing the number of votes for the 1 to 4 year range is actually blowing my mind. I saw that comment over and over and over again, repetitively. Combining the votes and taking accurate measurements to like redo the percentages, because I blended the margins. 7% between LinkedIn and Twitter. 7% of the total votes of 2,300 developers landed their job, their very first job in tech, in 3 months. That means 93% of the time, it took them significantly longer than 3 months. 93% of the time. If I told you anything was 93% guaranteed, you would immediately say, well, the 7% doesn't matter. It's going to be the 93 for me, right? Why are you putting yourself against the timetable of the 7%? Do you know how many things have to go right? How many anomalies have to just line up perfectly for you to land in that 7% mark of 3 months? I've only actually met one person in real life that landed their very first job in tech in 3 months. And that means from the moment they wrote hello world to employed, it took them 2 months. I've only met one person in real life. And that person is, honestly, should I say their name? I don't know. They're an influencer. They're pretty popular, right? But even they tell you, yeah, I got lucky because I knew the owner of the company. Damn. That's what it took him to land the job in 3 months? Do you know an owner of a company that's ready to hire you? Because if not, put that timetable on you of it being longer than that. 93% of the time it took longer than 3 months. 93% of the time it took longer, literally longer than 90 days. The biggest area that people voted on was the 1 to 4 year. That was the majority. The majority of the time, it took people 1 to 4 years to land their very first job in tech. That's why I constantly say you need to give yourself the permission to take your time and learn this stuff. Now, in that 1 to 4 year mark, they're not just passively sitting there and just like, hey, I guess, 2 weeks passed by, let me do another YouTube tutorial. No, they're actively working on it, developing the skills, they're diving deeper, they're building their craft, they're building their skill set. That's what I'm talking about here. You need to actually give yourself a fighting chance and build that skill set up. You're not doing that, so think about that. I'll go to Timo and then I'll go to Happy. Timo, what's going on?
Hey, Danny, and thanks for letting me for a short word in your space. So just a few things about the ATS that I have some knowledge of. If you use graphical things like boxes or something, you put stuff in, those could be skipped. And if you're applying to a company that handles a lot of sensitive data, it's possible that they will trash every application with any links. So be mindful of that. Use the URLs and not linking things, so that the ATS can understand that it's possibly not some scammy thing. Then I've been fortunate enough to sit through some of the interviews as an interviewer, and reading a lot of resumes, and have gotten some here on X too from people who are interested on how their resume look. And one thing, keep them short, keep them on a point. Don't use like pompous adjectives like I excellently did this and I spearheaded my team towards a victory on this project, and some silly stuff like that. Just bullet points, what you did, for who, and what they gained from it, and what did you learn from it, if you're not applying from a job to another, but as a new in tech. So those are kind of my points that I wanted, and also a little mathematics. The quick Google about callback percentage is somewhere below 10%. So that means it's below 10% on each application. You cannot beat it with volume, so stop spewing. Be mindful where you send your resumes, and adjust them towards what they're looking for. Lift up projects that they find interesting, even if it's not your like the grand scheme thing. And you won't beat the system with just spewing resumes all over the place. But it's the same odds on each resume on its own. So it's like poker. Variance is horrible, but you just gotta punch through it. And yeah, thanks, and hope everyone's having a great weekend.
Yeah, man. Thanks for hanging out. And definitely agree on a lot of those points. Like, truly, truly valuable. And you make a really valuable point too. Like, when you're over designing your resume and you're doing graphical things, how do you think somebody's going to translate that? Like, a lot of people don't think about that and they just kind of throw any design on there. It could be hindering your situation. One prime example too, by the way, like Indeed, their software, when you apply for a lot of things, it translates your resume. Even if it's dual column, it'll try to translate it into a single column. There's a lot of errors that may come about by doing that. So think about that. Thanks for sharing that. Happy, go ahead.
Yeah, good day, everyone. And just like I hope like you guys are all having a wonderful day. First thing, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to Danny. One, just for like organizing the space, and second, I resonated with like most of your initial remarks. Right, so that's that. Uh, I just wanted to like quickly highlight one thing. right? So there was one point regarding like you design your resume catering to a specific job role or requirements. I mean, there is like one thing that you should also understand is that uh, you should not put in there something that you're not good at just because like you want to design it specific to the role. So let's say a job role with like asking for next days, and you just like because you have seen a few tweets or like just because you've heard of it, you just put it in the resume. It might like get you in through the initial shortlisting, but I mean, it will be a huge sort of a time waste for you as well as for the interviewer. In most cases, it will not go well. I mean, there are cases where if you have, let's say, enough time to prepare for the role itself, you might, cover a few things, but still, that's I mean, you probably are putting yourself in a hard position there for, getting the job. So, yeah, that's just one point I wanted to quickly add. Uh, Other is, uh, I mean, in most cases, you know, you always like, I mean, you cannot be like, let's say, be interview ready just by, a couple of like weeks or months of preparations. And in most cases, the job that you do at work, will also be not sufficient enough to get you in a state where, you're enough qualified for like, quickly just like see the opportunity and grab the job. So you'll have to do something outside of your like work. You have to spend some time just brushing your skills on the side. That's second thing that I wanted to make. Second point I wanted to make, and third was mostly networking. So I think that's pretty much like very important. And the last one is luck. Even though like you must be like fully prepared, it might not go well on certain days just because you're not. I mean, the interviewer not having a good day or like just. I mean, there are those lucky days that you did not do well, even though like you were preparing or like doing well for like good amount of time or like your concepts well. Yeah, those are the points like I just wanted to quickly put there. And once again, like thank you, Danny, for like giving me the opportunity to come on the stage and like speak myself. And thanks for hosting the space. Thank you very much.
Yeah, man. Now, I'll say this. Luck definitely plays a factor to a large degree. Definitely agree with that. But I also say that luck doesn't create everything because I haven't seen very lucky people kind of get lucky off the couch. They were always actively working towards something. So make sure that if you want to be lucky, you're actually creating that luck to a certain degree and putting the right things there for you to kind of take advantage of those opportunities when they come. And that's kind of like the whole premise here, even from the beginning, where I kept saying, and I'll say it again, give yourself a fighting chance, y'all. Like so many of these things that I kind of see popping up over and over, it's from people not even doing that. Like, if you can't give yourself a fighting chance, why should I manufacture that for you on the hiring side to make that happen? It doesn't make sense. So please make sure. And a big reason why I list out the things that I list out of like things to do, I always say it's to give yourself more ammunition to kind of make that conversation go favorably. Because the reality is, my biggest goal when I go in an interview, honestly, is to kind of deconstruct it from an interrogation, because that's what they always start as, and turn it as much into an organic conversation as humanly possible. And having those tools on your side kind of makes that happen. By the way, I do want to say one thing before I go to a couple people. By the way, this space is brought to you by AppRight, right? Like I'm a brand ambassador for them, so I always shout them out when I do these spaces and all that good stuff. Highly recommend checking them out. I'm a big fan of AppRight. Hopefully you will be too, and all the good stuff. But they kind of make it to where I can start doing these a lot more regularly, especially when it comes to the Udemy giveaways. Like, so basically the way it works is like my last meetup, they bought all the pizza for it. So we had pizza for everybody. And the last Udemy giveaway, they gave me the money to do the Udemy giveaway. So it's going to be a lot better for me now, so because I do them so often, it costs me so much money. So hopefully, like, it won't be costing me a lot of money anymore. So that's been pretty cool to kind of have them support me and at least support the community. So because of that's why I kind of give them extra shout outs and whatnot. They definitely got like a special place in my heart now, especially because they don't really have a benefit in doing so besides like, I guess, the shout out, but they didn't even ask for this. So I just kind of do it as a thank you, because they could be completely silent about it, but I feel like I can amplify them, and maybe some people kind of check them out because of it. I want to go to Lawrence first because I know I brought up Lawrence. Then we'll go to Utba and Jake. Lawrence, what's going on, man?
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to my Finnish friend in the building, Hiva Paiva. I'm trying to learn a little Finnish since my new company, Vaadin, is based in Finland. I wish I was here earlier so I could know what was said and I wouldn't repeat anything, but let me just do it this way. I did have a one-on-one with somebody this week, and they actually didn't call me or reach out to me for a one-on-one. They just wanted to get a connect with FedEx, but I'm not there anymore. So I took advantage of the time we had and went ahead and just ran through their portfolio and brand. And to the point of this meeting, which is why aren't you getting a job in tech? First year, finished a boot camp in May and was just really distraught she hadn't landed anything yet. Again, that's only been 3 months. So message number one, calm down. It's going to take a little longer. That was message number one. And that goes for anyone else in the similar position. Just calm down. It's going to take a little longer. Okay. You might need to find some auxiliary jobs or other ways in while you're waiting on your big win to happen. It's just going to take longer. Then we ran through the things, right? The things we always talk about in Twitter spaces. Went straight to her LinkedIn. She had a decent number of connections. It said 500 plus. I didn't dig any farther than that. But there was no posts, literally nothing. She had reposted a couple of things from other companies and people, but she didn't have any original posts. There was no learning in public. So the advantage of that internal SEO, if you will, was completely gone. Went down to the skills section. She had a minimal number of skills listed, no recommendations. Like, we talk about these things all the time. You've run over it, Danny, in your video series in depth. I'm not sure why we're not doing the basics. And she went to a very well-established boot camp. So I'm not sure why nobody in the boot camp that she paid for, because it's one of the high-paid ones, told her you've got to boost up your LinkedIn. That's not an option. That is literally the cost of admission. That's just to get your foot in the door, just to get seen. The first job in getting a job in tech is just getting your brand, your profile seen. Visibility is everything because there's a lot of noise. We call it oversaturated. I call it noise. It's like trying to fine tune on an FM or an AM signal. Tons of noise. You're trying to tune into that signal. Your signal is those companies with open jobs are looking for people, but they're not finding you because you're not doing the basics. LinkedIn optimization is just the basics. It started there. We went on to portfolio. I asked her, let me see your portfolio. Because we were on not a Zoom, but a WebEx, Google Meet together. It's like, hey, let me see your portfolio. Just pull it up right quick. All right, let me go to my GitHub. Stop. Your GitHub is not your portfolio under any circumstance. Danny said this 1,000 times. I'll repeat it. The first person that may come across your brand, I'm going to call it your brand specifically, on LinkedIn, will probably not be a person who has any interest in deep diving into your code on GitHub. At the most, they will love to just click a link, see a fully functioning, working website, application, game, something that preferably they don't have to log into. If it does involve login, give them a nice, easy guest login so they don't have to give up any information, or a bypass. But they want to see working code in the wild, working. They want to see the thing. So they can say that, yes, Danny might have graduated from this boot camp or whatever, but here's something he built with his hands. Now, maybe second or third stage, when you get into more technical interviewers, they'll want to look through it and have you talk through that code, but not the first stage. So that's another area of invisibility, another reason people aren't getting the job in tech, misinterpreting what a portfolio is. It is that easy visibility to put you out there and give someone to have confidence they can potentially trust you with their code, or at least they won't look crazy if they recommend you to advance in the, I shouldn't say crazy, but they won't look silly if they recommend you to advance in the interview stages. No interviewer wants to look bad. No hiring manager wants to look bad for progressing somebody along who's completely unqualified. Now that calls their job into question. So you want to overqualify yourself, or as Danny says all the time, de-risk yourself. A portfolio should be easy to access and have deployed, working, fully fleshed out projects. What's the next thing? She had 3 things. I was 2. Crap. All right, I'll think of the next one later. I'll stop right there so I don't start talking in circles. Thanks, Danny.
No problem. You know what's funny? He wasn't even here earlier. I described so many similar scenarios of one-on-ones I've done with juniors. Exact same thing every single time. It's a repetitive cycle. So I remember in the beginning of the space, I even told y'all a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing, it's a trend that's very repetitive with a lot of beginners. And that's specifically why I'm trying to emphasize these things and to add extra emphasis on one point in particular. I was on a call with a bunch of recruiters. I talk to recruiters and hiring managers a lot because number one, I want to definitely be in the know of what's like things that are top of mind for them or things that they're looking for. Obviously, because I want to help more people get jobs, right? I don't make nothing off of this, by the way. Like people are thinking like I'm taking commissions or something. I don't make a dime when somebody gets a job. The only thing I get as reward or payment for this is I get to do a little shoulder shimmy every single time somebody gets a job. I get to share it and we get to celebrate their success in the discords and the communities and stuff like that. That's it. Like I tell folks, I purposely don't take money for this, mainly because my fear, which I know is a valid fear, because I know how I am. If I start monetizing it, I'm going to start going from trying to help people or give advice to people that may quote unquote be the difficult hire and start focusing on who can I flip the fastest, right? I know how I am. And I know if money became a metric of like, or at least something that I was looking at as a source of like success metrics for this, that's exactly how to be. That's exactly why in all these years, I've never taken a dime. I don't take referral fees. I don't take none of that stuff. I don't want it. Only thing I get to do is celebrate y'all. So, and that's what I also tell people because they ask me like, why don't I do more frequent spaces, or why don't I do like more individual calls and stuff like that? Y'all, you got to understand something. I don't monetize this, and so the problem is I literally lose money doing this, right? Like I lose money being in here. Like right now, we've gone on for just a smidge over an hour. We'll be wrapping up soon, but right there, I just lost an hour's worth of pay being in here. But my hope is by me investing this time in y'all, you're going to do what's required to actually make something happen so we can all kind of celebrate together. That's the whole point of this. And the point is, if actionable, accurate information is the reason why you can't get somewhere, let's remove that blocker. Not knowing what you need to do is blocking you from somewhere, cool, let's remove it. Now it's removed. Are you going to actually implement it and do what's required and kind of make something happen that's necessary for you to kind of get to that success metric of what you're looking for? That's what I'm looking for. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I take the time to go through this stuff. That's why we made the Discord. That's why even the LinkedIn series. Do you know at this point in my life, with as many people that have landed jobs because of that, I could guarantee you I could put that behind a $5.99 paywall and I will be swimming in it, man. You know how many screenshots I have of people landing jobs? I could literally be, my summer vacations will be paid for. I don't care about that. It's on YouTube specific. Actually, it was on a different website before YouTube. It wasn't moved to YouTube until someone told me, because the whole idea was, you know, I want anybody to access it no matter what. But basically somebody told me, hey, I live in a country, they're actually in Nigeria, and the internet is extremely expensive here. So for me to view stuff and learn stuff, I go to a place with Wi-Fi, I download it all, and I view it at home at night when I can view it and learn from it. That changed. That's when I threw it on YouTube, just so people could download it for offline viewing. That's why it's there. Boom, use it, right? That's the whole reason why it's there. And so none of it makes, I don't think it makes really anything of substance, if I'm being real, but I haven't really paid attention to it. And to be honest, programming on YouTube doesn't really pay anything anyway. So it's not really paying much. So don't worry about that. It's there for a reason. The reason is anyone should be able to access it and kind of get use out of it, right? And if that's the thing that's blocking you from getting success, cool, boom, cool. Put it out there. I think Lawrence remembered his third point, so I'll go back to Lawrence.
You are right. Thank you. So I asked her, what is her application strategy? And she said, my what? I said, what's your application strategy? She goes, you mean like how many? Like I'm doing like 5 or 10 a day, every day. And so I'm not going to open up the shotgun versus targeted approach in this space because that'll take an entirely different hour. And I'm sure you're ready to get back to your family. What I said is, if you do that mass applying, you have to make sure you're additionally pulling out a job or two that you really think you can get, that really means a lot to you. It has the culture. It looks like a great fit, and take your time and customize your resume for that job. There's a balance. There's a trade-off. There's trade-offs in everything. There's trade-offs in tech. There's trade-offs in your career strategy. If you're mass applying, you're banking on the fact that the sheer volume of numbers is going to help you get that lead. That lead being the company interested in you, just the sheer volume. The problem is, while your numbers are a positive, you're killing yourself because not aligning your resume to that reduces the likelihood that you're going to come up in what they're scanning for. And whatever keywords or algorithm they're using, you're dramatically reducing it. So the flip side, so that's one extreme. The flip side is I will never mass apply. I will only have completely, aligned and completely customized resume for every job. That's great for the alignment side and visibility, but then you lack numbers, right? Because you're really waiting. So there's a balance there, and everybody has a different approach. I'm not telling you which one is better or worse, but if you go all mass apply, just understand there's a massively small chance that you will ever be seen. Somewhere in that mix, say next week, I'm not going to mass apply. I'm going to apply to one job. I'm going to redo my resume. If I need to work on a single freaking project this weekend, just so I can include the type of database they use, like whatever I need to do, I'm going to do something particularly different to help bring me to the top of the stack. I need to be visible. I might need to go hard on my LinkedIn for 2 weeks or a week, see if I can make at least one connection, get a referral. I need to do something special for at least one, so I had that targeted approach to my favor as well. That was the last thing I want to say about her. Last thing I want to say, period, I really want to encourage all of my juniors, all of my people making that first move into tech. You're in that transition period. Please, please, I implore you to the depths of my being, please start following people who are highly successful in the industry, in the area you're looking for. I could not imagine a person in a pre-med program in college, and the people they look up to most are the juniors in college. I wouldn't ever imagine that. Or a person who wants to be, I don't know, a construction manager. They want to just start building out plots of houses, right? And they're taking construction management. They're a sophomore, and the person they listen to most often and they get all their advice from is a senior about to graduate. That wouldn't make any sense. They need to look to the industry and see the people who are building the houses. But for some reason, and I can get into this, but there's not enough time, we get our lens confused in tech. And bright, shiny objects have been replaced with bright, shiny people. And we flock to people who really cannot help us through example, but they sound good or they look good. Like, ooh, that was a great point. Like, there's some people clicking follow on me right now because I'm making great points. Go research me first. Look at my LinkedIn, see where I've worked. Make sure I've actually successfully been a developer before you listen to me tell you how to be a developer. Don't be so quick to hit the button. Some of you are just like, it's like the blind leading the blind. If there are successful people, if you're a Python dev, do you know who the successful Python devs are? Do you know, if you're a Java dev, do you know anybody who's on the committee of Spring, anybody who's helped maintain the language? Are you following them? Very often they're the quietest ones on social media. They're not influencery type of people, but they are making it happen in tech. That's who you should be paying attention to and learning what's going on in the culture of the thing that you claim to want to join. And then, come and hang out with the little friendly people, in your spare time. But know who's actually making a difference. And if it's a path like how to break into tech, then you should find out who has done it and done it well, successfully. 3 years, 5 years, 8 years. What was their example? In some cases, there are going to be slight nuances that they share that sound different from everyone else. Some of you are thinking right now, this guy sounds different from everyone else because I tried to exemplify what I'm talking about. I need you all to find not just me or Danny, but other people who are shining examples of the path. Because one thing that Tony Robbins said, I always believe and always repeat, is that success leaves clues, which means you should be able to deconstruct success into steps. And if you follow the same steps in the similar way, you should expect to get similar results. That's a good old scientific method. That's the last thing I want to say. Thank you. Have a great day.
So a couple things. Number one, for those that do know or don't know, I know I've talked about this multiple times. There are a few select people in my life that I know I will probably know until the day I die. Lawrence is absolutely one of those people. I implore you, if you're not, follow this man. Amazing human being. I've known him for years. He's always been authentic, real, amazing heart. He's the reason why I went to my first meetup ever. I won't go into that story now, but he's literally the reason why I went to that first meetup ever. And he's part of the reason why I even thought about this space today, because number one, I've already been thinking about doing something on this topic, but not necessarily from like the negatives. But we were literally talking yesterday about how many people end up in our conversations or our DMs asking for help, and they're the career coaches that they try to advise others to do stuff. Or like the other day, I literally see somebody who isn't in tech, hosting a space where they're giving advice. I'm very selective on who I do spaces with because I know when I do it, people will jump into it. It may give an impression. So I'm very selective on that. I don't want to be in a space where someone who's trying to get into tech is advising others on how to get into tech when they haven't got into tech. Or I'm very selective on, hey, this person only had an internship in tech. Why are they giving people advice on how to pass senior level technical interviews? It seems very bizarre that this is the narrative on social media, but I see it all the time. Or how many people literally do spaces and they take my stuff and they say, which I don't care about, by the way, but they take what I say, they repackage it and try to present it as their own. But now they're doing it on like, hey, I could do it for this fee or this pay. I'm putting my stuff out for free. Leave it out there for free. I don't care if you take it, but don't put it behind a paywall now. But I see it all the time. And it gets me concerned. And it's the only reason why I ever started social media. I didn't like it. But the reason why I really focused and started on it, literally a YouTuber charging for calls, right? I don't mind anybody making money online. I'll never knock anybody for making money online. But they were charging $8,000 for 12 30-minute calls. $8,000. And it's all on how to get your first job in tech. Who got $8,000 when they're trying to change the circumstances? It's a crazy number to be putting against people and monetizing their goals. If you're going to do a call, do it for something that's not going to break the bank. But again, I'm not going to knock anybody for doing it. I just want to have an alternative for those that may not necessarily have the financial funds to do that stuff. And to be honest, I don't have a financial incentive really in it. For me, I don't mind making absolutely zero off of it if I'm being real. But if there's a way that we can help you and like kind of share things, go for it. But otherwise, that's why we have that's why we built the Discord community. That's why we built the YouTube series and all that stuff. Like everything we're putting out there for free intentionally because I know how it is not to have cash. So but again, it goes back and to one point also, Lawrence shared something earlier on like I forgot the beginning of that third point, but it's very similar to what it is that we shared earlier in the space, which is great because we recorded this space. So if you came in later, you can go back and rehear it. But if you heard something of value now, share this space. You never know who's going to kind of get value out of this. There's over 200 people in here. I gave you 10 minutes of notice. So thank you so much for hanging out. I know I didn't really give any notice at all for this. But you can always go back if you missed something and kind of hear all the other points because we covered a lot in this space. For like the first 45 minutes, I didn't even bring up another speaker because I was so focused on making sure that the actual key points were shared. You can go back and listen to it. If you're like a career coach hiding in the corner, take my stuff. I don't care. If it means to help somebody, cool. But leave it out there for free, y'all. Don't put it behind no paywall, okay? I want people to get the access to the information they need. All right, I'm going to go to Utba and then I'll go to Jake. Utba, what's going on? And if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, please fix that.
No, you pronounce it correct. Do you hear? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Quick question regarding the resume, right? So just to give you a background, I'm a system engineer, right? I have 4 years of experience working as a network operation on my 9 to 5, right? And the thing that I'm struggling with is how to lay out my transferable skills on my resume. I have talked to multiple recruiters, and they say since you do not work with the development side at your daily job and that requires coding or programming, you should just completely remove it and then add more of your personal project. So the question that I'm trying to ask you is it necessary to completely remove the 4 years of experience that I gained in the technical industry?
Hell no.
Right? Or should I just go ahead and still put it there and then apply for it? Just wanted your advice on that.
Yeah, whoever said that, man, this space is being recorded. Yeah, I can't say what my knee-jerk reaction was. It's not family friendly. Hell no. That's terrible advice. That is such bad advice. That blows my mind. This is what I'm talking about auditing your influences, man. I don't know who said this. Absolutely horrible. Absolutely horrible.
I actually I'm not gonna name it, but I actually went to one of them, and then only one recruiter that I have one-on-one meeting on a Google Meet. He's the only one who recommend to insert all the information that you have in terms of your working on your 9 to 5 in your resume, and make sure you highlight all the key points that you worked on, regardless whether it's development required or not. He's someone in our community, and he's in the Twitter, but I'm not gonna name it since it's recorded. He's the only one. The rest of the recruiters say just go ahead and remove it because
No.
it's not valuable and it might come across off for recruiters. That's just something that is kind of like really concerned to me, and that's the reason I wanted to ask this question.
Yeah, no, don't do that. That's absolutely horrible advice. You should absolutely leave that experience, especially 4 years of experience. Sure, it's not development experience, but there are things that you can list within that and your contributions and things that you've done that is still valuable. It's the same thing when, like, this is why I have a problem with like boot camp career coaches. Not saying that the people that gave you this advice were, but that's why I often speak at boot camps to deal with this, because they'll tell people something similar, like, oh, you have non-technical experience, remove that and list more projects. Here's the thing. You know how many resumes I've seen where they list like 10 projects? You know what recruiters do when they see that? They scroll past it to get back to the good stuff. You should have one project on there. The absolute maximum you should have is two, but I try to always advise people to stick to one. It's your big project. It's your like audacious, like big kind of thesis level project. That's what I'm talking about, right? Only one. Talk about the problem that you solved with it, the solution that you delivered, the technologies that you utilize, stuff like that. That's what you should be listing with that one project, two max. Everything else should be things that you've done. 4 years in tech, sure, it's not development experience, but systems engineer is a valuable experience that you can list out. It is absolutely not bad at all. Anyone that said otherwise, like, I'll say in a private space later on down the road what I think about that advice. But yeah, it's absolutely terrible. There's things that you can list that would be valuable. Same thing that if you had non-technical experience, I'd still tell you to list that experience and list it in the way that you showcase kind of, hey, this is what I did within this role. These were things that I led. I did X, Y, Z, and quantify the things that you can. But 4 years in tech, even though it's not development experience, that's like being like, oh, I was a cloud engineer, but now I want to be a software engineer, so I'm going to leave the cloud experience off. That makes no sense whatsoever. So yeah, no, that's bad advice. Don't do that. Lawrence, go ahead.
Hey, Danny, how long is the space going to be open?
Probably after Jake's question, it'll be over.
All right, I'll be fast then. As Danny said, horrible advice. The last thing you want to do is have all this gap in your employment history and make people think you've been sitting on your butt unemployed for all these years. That's even worse. But you knew that without asking anybody. Some things you need to literally use your own good sense and screw the advice. Like, why would I have no work history just because it's irrelevant? Now I look like I've been an unemployed grown man sitting on my butt. Wouldn't that look significantly worse to even a casual observer? You knew that already, though. Trust your instincts on some things. So definitely don't follow that advice. In terms of the other part, you asked about the transferable skills. So there's two answers to this. I'm going to be really fast, respect the time of the space. My background prior to coming to tech was restaurant management. You know that already. I had to really sit down and think, how am I going to take 17 years in the restaurant business and make any sort of relevance to programming? There's hardly any. But you know what? Leadership counts everywhere. And I actually thought about it. You know what? I did have to do some tiny little programming, so to speak, not with a coding language, but with our registers, with our MIS system. And so basically what I did is I minimized the restaurant experience. I still included it, so I don't look like I'm an unemployed bum, but I minimized that. And I emphasized my projects, minimized the irrelevant work experience, and the few bullet points that I did have, they had either some leadership qualities or something pseudo-tech related, very pseudo. Again, I was a restaurant manager. I'm flipping burgers. I'm washing dishes on Saturday when the dishwasher quits. That's what I actually did. But I had to think, what can I use that even sounds close to the role, and then minimize that and emphasize the projects, but certainly include both. The next thing is, let's say if somebody started a boot camp today, and let's say it's a 6-month boot camp. The one thing you want to do is future pace, which means you know what you want your resume to look like, let's say come May or something. Begin taking on tasks, volunteering for things. You might have to go a little extra effort in your current job in order to have a bullet point or two that sounds more like your future job, even that's not what you're paid to do. right? Not sysadmins, but people like business analysts, analysts of all types. Oh my gosh, so many different roles that have a little flexibility. You could simply automate a process with Python and have a huge win that sounds real, is technical, is relevant, is letting you use keywords in your bullet point, but you have to think in the future. Now, I know that doesn't qualify for you, like you're in that stage now, but I'm saying if a person in the beginning stage, think now about how you want your resume to look later. For instance, I just started at a company bought in last week. Most of y'all know that. I know right now what I want my resume to look like in 3 years because I know I'm going to try to stay there for at least three. That's the minimum. Like they're getting my best. And so I'm planning today on week 2, the things that I want to involve myself in, the types of wins I would like to have, and I'm going to align myself and ask for those opportunities over the next 3 years. So I'm planning my resume before I have to work it. See, most people work a job 2, 3, 5 years, whatever. Then when they're ready to leave, they think back, what the heck did I do? You have to flip that on its head. This is a strategy. When you start a job, think, where do I want to be? What do I want to look like in the next 6 years? Let me do whatever I can. And sometimes, hey, if you're just stuck as a cashier, you're stuck as a cashier. Like there's not a whole lot of flexibility. But is there anything I can do, even if it's not in my technical job description, that I can do? I can get a win and I can drop that on my resume to help position me for the next spot. And I'll stop there.
Yep. I mean, even earlier when I gave the examples of non-technical roles that you can be sharing, if you didn't listen to the beginning part of the space, but I think it really applies to a lot of what we're discussing now. And I think that can kind of put you in the mindset of like what you need to be listing here. So I won't go too further, much more into this, but I will say, I do think, man, this is stuff why like I stay on. So like people ask me why I run my mouth so much on social media, because I do. I'll be honest, like if you don't follow me, I don't blame you. I run my mouth a lot on this platform. Timeline's probably better off for it. I'm not going to be no judgment there. I never get mad if somebody's not following me or not. I really do. But at the same time, part of the reason is because of this. Like I don't know how loud and vocal I need to be to kind of help folks in the right way, to steer them in the right way. I can't even begin to tell you the number of people that have been like, I never knew I could get a job in tech until I talked to you or like heard your story. That means a lot to me too. Or like, even, not too long ago, I was approached by somebody in town. I live in Texas. And so in town, I literally was approached by somebody at a meetup. They were like, I didn't know I could actually start interviewing for jobs and stuff until I saw or listened to your podcast episode with Code Newbie. And that changed everything. That meant a lot to me, right? I don't know how vocal I need to be to kind of get people into another position. But I also sometimes question how vocal I need to be in order to protect people from a lot of people that want to really take control of like or monetize their dreams and hopes. And like it's a constant struggle that I deal with, because sometimes I'm like, do I just be clickbaity because I can be clickbaity and match the energy of these bigger creators so that way I can start protecting folks from some of the bad stuff? What do I do to match it? Because the ones that get the most visibility are the ones that are doing stuff that we aren't necessarily all fans of, but because we're not doing it, we're losing those eyeballs and it's going in the wrong direction. And because they're beginners, they don't necessarily have the information as of yet to be able to distinguish between the good and the bad. So they just end up following where all the likes and attention are because they're using social metrics as a way to prove, like, I guess, vet the info, which is also why at the beginning of the space I kind of said, audit your influences and don't let the exchangement of red hearts for the things that you want to hear be the thing that guides you, because I think that's a bad way to do things. But it's something that I constantly struggle and think about with how far do I go down that path to try and bring people back to the right information, and vice versa. I don't know. It's something I'm going to keep thinking about. It'll be something that, unfortunately, until the end of time, it plagues us, and it's something that we all always, want to fight and combat, but we may not necessarily have the tools to do so, or even the strength and stamina to continue doing it. Who knows, right? Anyway, we're gonna go to Jake. Jake, what's going on?
Hey, thank you, Danny. Just wanted to briefly tell my story real quick. I recently broke into tech about give or take 4 months ago, and I got extremely lucky breaking into tech. I was a training manager for my current company for a little over 2 years, and was on the verge of being laid off because the project that I was currently working on at that time was set to end. The company gave me a courtesy of letting me know a few months prior to the project ending. So during that time, I started diving into the world of cloud. I even got to pick up the AZ 900 certificate. Luckily, my employer took notice and invited me to a meeting for the creation of a chatbot that was for a completely different project. During that meeting, while pretty much everyone was silent, I was extremely engaged. I was asking questions about it. And because of this, my employer took notice. And then a few weeks later, I was actually offered a system analysis position leading the project for that particular chatbot. Even though luck did play a huge role in putting me in that particular position, I was still putting in the work to understand what the project needed. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much, Danny.
Cool. I agree with that. Like, it's like what I said earlier. I think we all have our opinions when it comes to certain things. I definitely have my opinion on the subject of luck, but it requires you to be lucky, or luck requires you to be active. Otherwise, the non-active would constantly be getting all the opportunities. But I've never really seen people that just lay down all day, not developing their craft, get lucky. The ones that are kind of getting that luck are the ones that are putting in a lot of work and things go favorably for them. But even when it comes to like what I shared earlier, when we did the poll, and I'll share it again, literally did my annual poll that I always put out. I asked developers that work in tech, hey, only devs that work in tech, how long did it take you to land your first job in tech? We had over 2,300 votes. I feel like that's a good, amount of votes to kind of gauge and get an accurate representation of the number. And through all the votes, only 7% between Twitter and LinkedIn, 7% landed a job in 3 months. And I'm bringing this back to make a point. 93% of the time, it took them longer, significantly longer than 3 months to land a job in tech. Audit your influences and think about that. If someone is sending you and selling you a dream where you can get a job in 3 months, and they're basically using a metric that only 7% of people get, really think about what their intention is there. Are they giving it to you because they're like, you can really hit the 7% mark? Or are they giving it to you to say, hey, I don't care what happens to you after that 7%, but you bought my course and that's all that really mattered to me. Think about that. You need to change the mindset of what's the least I can do for a role to what do I need to learn and build my craft upon, because that's important. And damn it, if some of y'all don't take the next couple of days over this weekend to go over the job boards and actually audit and find out what's in demand in your market, I'm going to drop kick somebody. I swear I keep saying it, but I keep seeing the exact same thing over and over and over. Please, y'all stop going off of it. I know right now if I make a tweet that says learn HTML, learn CSS, learn JavaScript, learn React, it's getting 10,000 likes with me barely trying. But the reality is that might not necessarily be what's in demand in your market. If I told everybody to learn JavaScript, tech Twitter, I was about to call it JavaScript Twitter, tech Twitter would be all over it and loving it, right? But that might not be what's in demand in your market. Some of y'all forget that. Please. I said it in the beginning of the space, and I'm going to say it at the end to end the space on it. Give yourself a fighting chance to actually land and build off of this. So many of y'all are not doing that. And like the asks and the ways to do that aren't even massive asks and massive requirements for you to do this. But you need to get out your own damn way, stop sabotaging yourself, and give yourself the ability to build your skill set, be the problem solver, and use syntax as the delivery mechanism of those solutions. Instead of saying, I memorized everything that I needed to know about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, cool, where are them jobs at? That might not be enough. Understand why we're paid what we're paid. Understand what our contribution is into companies. What are you going to be doing within your role? I'm not in my job every single day just fixing a button. I'm fixing the logic that's behind the button. I'm fixing what it's doing, what it's communicating with. I'm fixing the forms and the tables that it's going to. I'm fixing the back end where we're doing all these characters. That's what your job is going to be. So start thinking in that mindset, develop the project, develop the skills, and have enough to talk about within that interview process to literally own and control a lot of that conversation. Because a lot of y'all just live it up to, man, I'm not even gonna lie. A lot of y'all just wing it and just hope everything turns out the way that you want it to turn out. And that's not the way that this is gonna be. I know that you're awesome. You know that you're awesome. You have the task to convince someone on the other side of a desk that you are awesome. Think about that and prepare yourself accordingly. Stop winging it. Stop leaving it up to chance and stop getting in your own way, because some of y'all could have already reached this level of success that you're talking about, but you've been in your own path and your own way preventing that from happening. Give me a damn reason to celebrate your success. I know you're going to do it. I genuinely believe in you. Let's make it happen. And I will see you on the next one. Goodbye, everybody.